Welcome to month 4 for the 5-blade Dresden flower fan. From fabric 2, we need a 10-inch square of fabric, so I'm just using this piece of black from a layer cake. It's a little over 10 inches with the zigzag edges. I'm just going to trim the zigzag off on 2 sides, clean it up just a little bit because I want to know where the corner of my square is when I get to that. So 2 sides no longer zigzag. The other two sides will trim down after we've put the Dresden fan on it. The remaining things we need to cut are 5 blades. We use 3 different fabrics. This is going to be my fabric 3, so this is going to be my center blade. And I want to show you how I use templates like this. Now I have used this several times, and what I do is I use a washable, it doesn't matter what brand, the key thing is a washable glue stick. So it could be Elmer's glue stick, any kind of fabric glue stick. And I'm going to put a stripe here and a little bit there. And then I press this down on my fabric. So now my template isn't going to move on me relative to the fabric. Now in the template, on the page, there's a heavy line, and that's the seam line if you want to. And then there's the outside cut line. What I do is I don't cut based on that cut line. What I do is I set my ruler down, and this is one of the things I like about the Creative Grid rulers, is the 1/4 inch line is marked off very nicely. But whatever ruler you have, set the 1/4 inch line right on top of that seam line, and so that it essentially disappears. That's where I want you to cut. And do that on all sides of the template. So we've got 3 sides here. 1, 2, 3. And each time I've lined it up so that the seam line is essentially, the line on the ruler essentially disappears. So I'm right exactly on it. So I'm getting my 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now the ends of this aren't exactly square, and I prefer to use a smaller ruler for trimming those, but we can do it with this one. These are all cut along the edge from the corner. So I'm putting the 1/4 intersection right here on the corner on the seam line. And when I get that nice and lined up, then you just trim off that little bit that sticks out. And we do this on all 3 of the corners. Line it up on the seam line with that 1/4 inch intersection right there at the intersection of the 2 sides. And then trim. You're only going to trim just a little teeny bit off on both of these corners. Just a little bit. When we come down here to this end, it'll be a little more dramatic. So I get the 1/4 inch intersection right on the point of my template. Line it up on the seam line. Trim. Do the same thing on the other side. Line it up on that 1/4 inch seam line. Oh, that looks beautiful. And trim. And you get a little bit of a point going on down here at the end. Okay, so there's the first piece cut. And we need to cut 4 more. 2 from our fabric 4 and 2 from our fabric 5. We'll meet back here when we get those cut. Alright, so here's our 5 blades all cut. Now here's where the fun begins, because now we're going to make our fan blades out of them. And the way in which you do that is you take each piece, fold it in half lengthwise, right sides together, and all you have to do is stitch a 1/4 inch seam across the end, across this short side. So let's do that for all 5 of our blades, and then we'll come back here and I'll show you how that becomes our magic fan blade. Well, here they are sewn, and what we need to do now is turn them right sides out and press them to make our blades. Now, what I like to do, and I mentioned this in the instructions, is I like to just trim a little bit off this inside corner. It's where the fabric is folded. I just like to nip off that corner just a little bit. So let me do that real quickly on these 5 blades. Alright, and then I use my Hera marker and I lay it right along the seam all the way out to the edge, and then I just turn the whole thing over around that. So I make sure I get that all the way folded out. And when you do that, there's our pointed fan blade. Now, let me turn these, and then I'm going to show you how I like to press them. Alright, the way in which I like to press them is I like to stick the nose of the iron in and open up that seam in there. Just press it a little bit. I've used the Hera to make that nice and pointed, and then I just eyeball lining that seam up in the middle and then just give it a quick press. Ta-da! A fan blade. Again, stick the nose of the iron in, open up that seam. This one doesn't want to cooperate. There we go. Now, eyeball it. No, that's way off. Get it to where it's right in the middle. Press. And repeat that for all 5 of the blades. Alright, so here's our 5 blades. Now, the key to putting these together and having a nice looking fan when you get finished is that when you pair them up to sew, don't look at how these ends match up. That's not the important part. The important part is to look up here and make sure the edges of your 2 blades are matched up. And then your side of the 2 blades needs to be matched up. And when you get to the end, they ought to match up. But if anything is off just a little tiny bit, they won't meet at this bottom end. Don't worry about that. Just worry about this top end. Match that up and then sew your 1/4 inch seam. So here's the first pair sewn together. Notice my top edge, I have a nice clean intersection where those 2 come together. What you're going to want to do now is take this and press this seam open. Once you've done that, you're going to attach your fabric number 4 blade to the other side of the fabric 3 side. Again, making sure that you match up the top. So I'll come back when I've got that one on and I have both seams pressed. Isn't our fan coming together nicely? And notice our intersections are good at the top, and I've pressed the seams open on the back, and all we need to do is repeat that to add the fabric 5 blades on either side. There's our 5 blade fan. Next, get that fabric 2 background square where I trimmed the edges, and now what I want to do is I want to line this up, my fan up along both edges. So it's going to not fit perfect, but we just want to make sure our fan is lying nice and flat and get it so the outside edges of your fabric 5 blades are right along the edge of your square. The next thing we're going to do is inside of the 1/4 inch seam allowance. Don't do a 1/4 inch, do something less than that. So we're going to stitch along the 2 straight sides just to kind of tack this down in place. Be right back. Notice that this is the stitching line right here is less than a 1/4 inch. It's less than a 1/4 inch away from the side, so it's going to be in the seam allowance. But also notice that it's not quite square on the corner. We'll take care of that later. What we need to do now is make an artistic decision. What the instructions say is to stitch along the pointed points of each of your fan blades. And that's what I'm going to do with this block. But you have other choices. You could do as I did here, which I did freehand, and I kind of did a little arc in each one of the blades. Now in doing that, I stitched up high enough that I caught the raw edges, but I have now my fan blade tips are loose. So it adds a 3-dimensional element to the block if you choose to do something of that nature. I'm not going to on mine though. I am going to top stitch right along the edge of each one of these blades. When I come back, I'll then show you how to trim your block to size. And there you have it. I've got the top stitching along the, sorry about that, top stitching along each one of the points. Now I'm going to take my square ruler. I have one here that's larger than 9.5 inches because I want to trim this down to 9.5. But first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to line up the edges of the ruler with the edges of the fabric to the background where it sticks out. And you'll see we've got extra little bits sticking out here. And I'm going to trim off and square up this corner. Alright, and now all I have to do is take my ruler, and I love the Creative Grids because it's got my 9.5 marked on there real nice. I can line up the 9.5 inch sides along the 2 trimmed sides of my block. You want to make sure that your blades are more than 1/4 inch from the edge. If they're less than 1/4 inch, it means they're going to get caught in a seam allowance. We don't want that. So this one is more than 1/4 inch, and over here we're more than 1/4 inch. So now I can take my rotary cutter and, trim my block to 9.5 inches. And there you have it, the 5-blade Dresden flower fan. Month 4 of Cheshire Quilters Guild 2017 block of the month. Next month we're going to do curved seams. So I look forward to seeing you then.